Welcome! In this series of videos, we will cover the design and implementation of a project, from initial design through coding and development to testing, using the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will continue our project to look at the use of software auto forms by adding a form summary in a grid format. This was our application at the end of the last video. We have created an application run by configuration file. This allows us to specify both the layout and the functionality of our dialog in an external file to the application itself. So we can create additional applications by merely creating new configuration files. We have navigation buttons at the top of our dialog, allowing us to step through each of the forms the user has actually saved. However, there is nothing in the application currently that allows the user to view all the forms at one time. That's what we're going to add today. We're going to add an additional navigation button at the top right-hand corner of the screen to allow the user to view all the forms currently created in a grid format. So let's have a look at the code. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a grid icon at the top right-hand corner of our dialog. So we're going to need a new icon. So I've copied in two icons, a grid icon to be used on the main dialog to allow the user to click upon it, and a cancellation icon which is going to be on a new dialog. This new dialog will contain the grid, which will list all the forms the user has already entered into the system. So we'll now reference these in code. We'll add new constants in, one for the cancellation and one for the grid. Having added these, we will add additional resource statements to bring both of those icons into the application. Next task is to display the icon on the main dialog. So we will position this new icon to the left-hand side of all the existing buttons. And we'll set this icon up the same way we have the others using the Button Plus library. So if we run the application now, we'll see we now have a new button at the top navigation bar. This will be the one we're going to be using to launch our new dialog. At the moment this has no tooltip, so let's add the tooltip. If we go to the event handler, where all the tooltips are set up, and if we add the new tooltip to say view all forms. If we run the application now, we'll see we now have a tooltip on the button. So having made the changes to the main dialog, we now need to call our new dialog. So let's create a new dialog. We will center this dialog on the screen by taking the DS Center option in the styles. And on this dialog, we're going to put two objects. There will be a cancellation button that will take us back to the first dialog. There will additionally be a grid control, and we're going to make use of the MyLittleGrid control as a static link library, pulling it into our application to make use of its very extensive properties. So we've now added a button to the bottom of our dialog. We'll further enhance this using the Button Plus library. So if we return to our application now, and we will set an icon on the dialog itself and an icon on our exit button. So we're using the dialog set icon command to add the icon to the dialog itself. And we're making use of the Button Plus library to add in the icon for the cancellation and also to position the icon to the left of the text. So if we look at the callback function, the event handler for our new dialog, so there is very little code in this callback function at the moment. So we will first add the code to allow the button click to exit the dialog and return to the original form. So that allows us to enter the new dialog and to exit it. Now we need to put some code into the original dialog to allow us to call this new dialog. So back to its callback function. So we will see in this callback function there is already an event set up for the grid button. However, it's just a message box. So we will take that line of code out and we're going to replace that with a call to our new dialog. So let's try running the application to check this link. If we go up to the top right hand corner, click on the button and our new dialog is appearing with the close grid button at the bottom. And if we click on that, it will take us back to our original dialog. So all good so far. The next thing we want to do is to display a grid on our new dialog. So in order to do that, we need to plug in the MyLotoGrid static linked library. So there are 3 files we need to bring into our code folder. The MyLotoGrid include file, the MyLotoGrid static linked library, and finally our library file, the MyLotoGrid light utilities include file. So we're going to add this include library to the beginning of our code. So we have a constant to set to 1 to let the system know that we're going to use MyLotoGrid as a static linked library as opposed to a DLL. We then include the include file from MyLotoGrid and we link in our static linked library. And below that we have the include for our utilities library to make MyLotoGrid that bit easier to use. There's also a constant and a global I want to set up to make use of our new grid control. So next on our to-do list is to go to the pb-main function. And in the pb-main function, we're going to call an initialization function for MyLotoGrid. It's important to set this up, otherwise MyLotoGrid will not function. So with the groundwork complete for MyLotoGrid, we can now go to our new dialog and add the grid control. So the first thing we need to do is to set the dimensions of the grid, where the grid appears on screen, x and y coordinates, and how wide and how tall the grid is going to be. So we've added a string variable called menu, which we will use later if we want any right-click menus on our grid. Below that is the actual control add statement, which adds the grid to the dialog. This uses the constant we set up earlier, mlg_grid1, and has a number of parameters. These parameters at the moment are just setting some defaults which we will override later on. For example, the number of rows and the number of columns. Next, we are capturing the Windows handle of our grid control. And we're using a macro to set up the remaining parts of our grid. This saves a fair bit of typing. We're calling a function in here, which is a new function we'll need to create in a moment, to get the form title. This will pull out from the configuration file the title of the form and will display it in the tab of the grid. This new function is going to follow the format we have followed in previous videos on this project. So I won't go into this in any great detail as it's covered in the previous videos. We're looking through the configuration file. We're primarily interested in the object column. Where the object column is a title, we're pulling out from the text column the text that's in that column. This will tell us the name of the form. We're returning that to the calling function. Additionally, we now want to populate these 2 variables, long rows and long columns. Since we know the number of rows in our global grid, which contains all the form data, we can quite easily work out the number of rows. And we'll need to do something similar with the columns. So at the top of our dialog configuration, we're going to put some new variables in. One for the column headers, one for the columns, and one for the rows. We will populate the column headers with a new function called getColumnNames. And we will count the columns based on the information in the column headers, as it's a comma-delimited list. And we'll count the number of rows as the upper bounding of our form data array. So let's create this new function, getColumnNames. Again, in the same light as the previous function, it's looking inside the configuration file again, this time looking for the field name column and the object column. And we're principally interested in all configuration that isn't a button, and also where the field name is not equal to a blank space. This is where we set the name of all the fields that are going to be exported to the CSV file, the output from the application. So if we try running the application now and click on our icon, we'll see we're now getting a grid displayed on the screen. The grid has the correct number of rows and the correct number of columns, but we have not yet populated the column headers or the data within the rows. That will be our next task. So before we display the grid to the user, we can go in and set the column names. We will set the names of the columns by calling one of the functions within our MyLittleGrids library, setColumnNames. It takes two parameters, the handle of the grid and the comma delimited list of our column headers. Next, we will color bank the grid rows, alternatively white and green. And finally, we will call the grid refresh function, which is another function within our MyLittleGrid library. If we try running that code now, and then click on our icon, we'll see we now have all the headers correctly shown on the screen. Plus additionally, each alternate row is color coded. So now all we need to do is to populate this grid with our actual data. So in order to do this, we're going to go back to the callback function, the event handler of our new dialog. So we're going to declare three new variables at the top of our callback function. One to be an array and two to be long variables. Next, in our initialization section, we're going to call a new function called Populate the Grid Array. This is going to take the data we have in the global array holding the form data. It will take this and put it into a two-dimensional array, which is suitable for putting straight into our MyLittleGrid. And we'll call this new function Populate the Grid Array, taking two parameters, the grid handle and the name of our new array, the two-dimensional array. And here is our new function. This will populate the two-dimensional array for the grid from the form data array. We can quite easily pick up the number of rows and the number of columns from there. We're adding an additional column on the number of columns. This is to have the ID column in our new array. The ID column is not held within the global array, but we want it visible as a number in our grid. So our first task is to do a for next loop for each of the entries in our global array. And our very first column is always going to be the form number. And then for the remaining of the columns, we're pulling the information out using a parse command. And we're putting it into the x and y coordinates of our two-dimensional grid. So since this function will populate a two-dimensional array, how do we put that two-dimensional array directly into our grid on screen? Immediately after that new function is called, we're going to use one of MyLittleGrid's own functions, the mlg_put_ex command. This routine takes four parameters, the first being the grid handle, the second being the name of the grid containing the data we wish to put into the grid, in this case a two-dimensional grid. The next is an option number. We're using option number 4 as we don't want to overwrite the column headers. The second value is a refresh. We're leaving this as 0 for the moment. If we left this as 1, this would refresh the grid immediately. Next, there are three more routines we want to call. We want to call the widen columns in grid function, which is one of the functions in our own MyLittleGrid library. This takes an optional parameter, which is exclude column. So we want to exclude column number 1 from this function. What this function does is it sets the width of the column based on the data within the column. It also takes into effect the width of any headers, so the column will be wide enough to accommodate both data and header. We're excluding column 1 as we want that to be fixed width. The second function we're calling will mark the entire grid as read-only. At this point in the project, we don't want the user to be able to actually amend the grid. And the final command is a command that refreshes the grid on screen to the user. So let's try running that code now. If we click on the icon, we get the data on screen of all the forms the user has actually filled in. The ID column, the name, the address, the department, the skill, the age, and the start date. as you will see clicking on the grid, or you can select a box, you cannot edit it. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we have added a new dialog to our application. This dialog has the sole purpose of displaying in a grid format all the data the user has entered in each of the forms. This allows the majority of the data to be seen at any one time. Using the My Little Grid control gives you a great deal of functionality we can make use of later on, with the minimum amount of effort. However, that's it for today. Thank you for watching.